Welcome, dear students. Today I will be speaking on a post-colonial poem which is titled A Far Cry from Africa by Derek Walcott. This lecture, if you say so, this lecture or this talk is mainly due to the request that some of my followers on YouTube channel they commented that, sir, if you can speak on a far cry from Africa, it would be really great, and that's why this video is all about. More to say, what I think that if you delve into a poem without knowing the background of the text of the poem or whatever it may be, it will be really difficult for you to understand. So today in my lecture I will be dealing with the background of the poem. Okay, so what actually is the background of this poem, what Walcott is trying to present, or what premise he is writing. Okay, so let's first, I am thinking, or I am taking this to be my class only. Okay, and I will be dealing with the background today of A Far Cry from Africa. Okay, so let's begin. If you can have the text, if you can follow the text, it will be really great. Okay, so here it is. This poem, A Far Cry from Africa, talks about the events of the Mau uprising in Kenya. Okay, it was in the early 1950s. In the mid 20th century, that is the 1950s, British colonialism was a thing which was blurring. Okay, it was blurring, but at the same time it was an intense power on the colonies, okay, or everyone, or every place on earth. Okay, and what we find over here, it was no different in Kenya. And this Mau uprising in Kenya during the 1950s or early 1950s, that is no different. In the African country of Kenya, British colonialists had settled and acquainted European ideas with the land, or with the local people, that is everything about the trade, everything about making money, like tax collection and land ownership and everything. Okay, as they do in every place. They established their own ideas. They did there also. At the point when the British asked, who possesses this land? Okay, who possesses the land of Kenya? The tribal people reacted to that and they said, we do. And the British assumed that we alluded to the tribal government. Okay, despite the fact that the land was really owned by the individual families. Okay, it is not like that the government will lease you land and everything, but it is actually owned by what, or owned by whom? It was owned by the tribal families. Since the Britishers, or the British, was supplanting the tribal government with their own, then they asserted all the land for the sake of the new British government. Okay, so they are putting in a puppet government in order to take control of the whole thing that was there, of the land that was there. Clear? Naturally, what happened? The Kenyan individuals were outraged. And now what we find here is that there is this tussle. Now, rather than owning and cultivating their own land, they were decreased to being workers for the British proprietors. So, what we find here is that this power struggle has started. Okay, it has outraged the Kenyan individuals who thought they were the owners of the land. The tribal government was in power, but what we find here is that the Britishers are supplanting or replacing the tribal government with their puppet governments. Okay, the new British government. And because of that, what we see? We see that the individuals, the Kenyan individuals, were losing their power, and that made them outraged. Now, what they are finding? They are seeing that they have become workers, they have become the people who are colonized in their own lands. They are workers on their own lands. Okay, as representatives, they were additionally offended by being paid just a small amount of the sum a British worker got for doing likewise work. Okay, so the torture was on two levels. First of all, everything that they owned, that is completely out of their hand. Now they are workers on their own lands, and they are paid less than any British worker would get. Okay, so what we getting here is that there is this subjugation upon subjugation. Okay, there is oppression upon oppression. One is there to fight, but how will they fight? They need to fight the colonizers, right? The Kikuyu tribe was the biggest in Kenya. Okay, the pronunciation is different in British and American accents. You can get hold of that. The spelling is Kikuyu. Okay, it was the largest or the biggest tribe in Kenya, and it was also the most learned one. Okay, in 1951, some Kikuyu upheavals of violence against the British happened. Some people gathered together and revolted, and in 1952, a mystery Kikuyu society known as the Mau Mau started a war against the British, and this war was not a non-violent one. Okay, it was violence stricken. Okay, it was a war of violence against the British, and not only the British, and it was also against any Africans who were faithful to the Britishers. Okay, so you get to know, or you already know, that you cannot dominate, you cannot control any country unless you have support from the people of that land. It happened in India. Okay, a class of Indians was always there to satisfy the Britishers. Okay, if that had not happened, some 10,000 to 20,000 Britishers would not have been able to colonize our country for so long. Right? There were people who were always in favor of the Britishers. They could not see the harms that were brought down on us. They only thought of their own benefit. They only thought of their only gains, the gains for their own family, own tribe, and everything. Okay, not just tribe, but their own individual gains. Okay, similar thing is there in every community, almost every community, and because of that, those communities could be dominated for so long. Similar African people were there who were faithful to the Britishers. So The revolt was not just against the Britishers. The war of violence was not just against the Britishers. Um the Mau Mau rebellion uh, started against the Britishers, and also was also against the Africans who were faithful to the Britishers. By October of 1952, the circumstance of those areas were so intense that the British got out troops to battle the agitators. Okay, and a 3 year war, 3 year war followed. Okay, and during this time period, during this 3 year time period, and remember, this is not just a non-violent struggle that India went through. Okay, it is a struggle of violence, and 3 years is a long period. You can do your graduations, right? Um, what we find here is that this 3 year war, which followed this rebellion or uprising, during this time, 1000 rebel warriors were executed. Okay, and somewhat around 80,000 Kikuyu men, women, youngsters were locked up in confinement camps. So, can you imagine the number of this devastation? And what we find here is that this was done by whom? This was done by 100 Europeans and somewhat 2000 Africans. Okay, and what we find here is that during this struggle, there was this uprising and everything, and afterwards, the leader of this rebellion, Jomo Kenyatta, Jomo Kenyatta, was chosen the Prime Minister of Kenya when Kenya became independent from Britain in 1963. So what we get here is that this is about this rebellion. But one of the most important things that we need to see here is that what is the stance that Walcott is taking over here. Okay, so with this conflict, with this rebellion, what do you find? In the poem, Walcott presents some graphic images of the conflict, okay, and asks how he can be expected to choose one side over the other, since he is of both African and European descent. Okay, so he has both qualities within him. So he has these qualities which are from both sides, and how can he choose a side? Okay, he cannot condone the colonialism of the British or the violence of the Mao, because choosing either side would mean he is turning against the part of himself. He is a divided personality. Okay, his personality is divided because of his birth, because of his identity. Okay, he cannot leave one identity for the other. Both things made him, right? So in this poem he deals with these things. This poem, A Far Cry from Africa, uses metaphors such as colonel of Cardian, and ironic statements such as corpses are scattered through a paradise, um, to describe the death and destruction and inhumanity that has occurred in both Africa and Europe. And one thing I forgot to mention here is that not just the rebellious people, the people of Kenya was dying, but many people, somewhat around 100 Europeans and some about people, 2000 people who were helping, 2000 Africans who were helping those Europeans, they were also killed. okay, not the whole lot. Okay, so what we get to see here is that there were several others who were helping uh, this community. Okay, but out of those 2000 Africans were killed, and out of the several hundred Europeans who were present there, 100 um, Europeans were killed. So the perpetration was on both ends, right? The violence happened on both ends. So Walcott wants to describe, or describes, the death and destruction and the inhumanity that has occurred in both Africa and Europe, on both sides. Clear? Walcott was privileged to bear both horrible histories as a half European and half African. The desire of the full-bodied natives was to look and act like the colonizers. They didn't have to bear the strain of being genetically comparable to the colonizers. Okay. However, and not only being torn between the two societies, but being divided to the vein, and I quote, divided to the vein. Okay, Derek Walcott utilizes his genetic hybridity and cultural hybridity to convey the extreme of his unholiness, and he is doing that. Clear? In his vein, that is Walcott's vein, um, flows the blood of the colonizers and the colonized. Okay, it also has this. It is the blood of the oppressors and the oppressed. Clear? So which side he will choose? It is really difficult. So Derek Walcott often describes himself as a mongrel, Mongrel. Okay, so they were of both African grandmothers and they were both European grandfathers. Okay, so he disliked the English culture. Okay, Walcott disliked the English culture but loved the English language and empathized with the Irish because they were the colonization and victims as well. Okay, so Walcott does not convey all elements of British and African culture in Far Cry from Africa, but what he does here is that he focuses solely on the violent history of the both cultures, or the both nations. Okay, he focuses solely on the violent history that is there. Okay, he is poisoned with the blood of both. Okay, and he is torn between a bloodied Africa's two terrible choices, or the England murderer. Okay, so what we find here is that he does not favor one side over the other, but rather focus on the injustices of both culture. Clear? It is the story, it is the poem narrates a story of a half African and half Englishman who witnesses the death and the destruction of his homeland as a result of the colonization, the English colonization. However, even when he is describing that, he does not favor one. Okay, because as I have told you before, if he had favored one, he would have not done justice with the other half. Okay, he just focuses on the injustices of both cultures. The narrator shouts at the end of the poem, wondering how to choose between the two. Okay, several elements of the poem demonstrate indications of transculturation. Perhaps the most evident sign to write this poem is the adoption by the narrator of the dominant English language that he is using. This element of English culture has in reality become such a component of the narrator that he refers to the language as the English language he loves. Okay, so this is more or less the background of the poem on which this is set. I hope you will have a better understanding of the text. Okay.